Welcome to Guided Spirit Conversations. I'm your host, Marla Goldberg. This podcast has been created with you in mind to acquaint you with some of the most incredible metaphysicians and spiritual leaders from around the globe who have helped others change their lives. In this interactive hour, you will be offered insights and techniques to help you make a difference in your life. Don't forget to subscribe to the show in your favorite listening platform. And here we go, on to the show. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's me, Dr. Marla Goldberg, coming to you with another show that I'm really excited about. So thank you for being a part of Guided Spirit Conversations. Remember, it's an interactive show. So if you want to ask my guest a question or myself, you can do so on my YouTube page or my Facebook page of the same name, Guided Spirit Conversations. So let me introduce to you our guest for today, Robert Althuis. So yes, I did pronounce it wrong in the announcement, but I was corrected. He's a spiritual coach, keynote speaker, and founder of Sacred Wealth Collective, a holistic wellness organization dedicated to embedding love and truth as foundational spiritual principles for an awakened humanity rising to its full potential. A profound spiritual awakening experience in 2015 activated Robert's intuitive gifts of claircognizance and clairsentience. As a spiritual teacher, Robert is both a celestial philosopher and a renegade real-world change agent. A certified medium, he holds a BA from Columbia Business School and was once a Fortune 100 executive and successful real estate and private equity investor. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And not that it matters very much, but it's an MBA from Columbia. They don't have BBAs, but...
Oh, did I say BBA? I'm so sorry. I'm looking at MBA.
Well, that's okay. I have a BBA too, just not from Columbia, but it's all good. It's really, it's just a diploma. So it's
I have a BS, and that's what comes out with when I screw up these names.
Not a problem. Not a problem at all. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm really excited to be here. So
I'm so great to have you here. I was looking, when I researched my guests and I found you, and I found it very intriguing. I found your background really intriguing. You worked at GE, and you were the youngest executive.
I was young. I mean, I wasn't the youngest maybe, but I don't want to claim that. But I was top 1% in my early 30s in GE. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then you left GE, and then you went into real estate investment, or?
Yeah. So I had a real estate background. So I was in real estate in my 20s. I went to night school. I graduated quite well from Georgia State University with a BBA in real estate. And then I got into Columbia Business School. And then I got recruited by GE Capital. And I had a very successful run there for 6 or 7 years. And, a few years in my early, about 34 or 33, I made top 1% of GE. I call that executive band. And, so I was really on this rising path, right? And doing all the things that we idolize in the material world and, worldly success and all that stuff. And then in the financial crisis, we actually shut down a unit, quite a few units at GE Capital, because we were doing a lot of cowboy stuff. And then I bought out a little what's called an orphan asset. It was a leftover business. And that's how I got into business for myself in 2009. And that business built airport infrastructure around the world. Wow. And so I was involved in building cargo facilities and hangars and all kinds of big, large-scale infrastructure around the world. And I ended up having quite a substantial business in Latin America in the following years. We had numerous deals that we did there. And then I had this, what they call the big exit. In 2015, I sold most of my business. My private equity partners and pension fund partners all wanted to harvest the gains. And I got a big payday. And I reached this proverbial mountain peak point where, you've always said, like, when I get there, then I'll be complete. Then I will have made it. And when I get there, I'll be happy and I will have no more problems in life. And so I got there. I got all the money. I got the house, the perfect wife, the kids, the toys, the cars, all the shiny objects you could imagine. And I was completely empty inside. It didn't fill up that void. And so I was very disillusioned And now, in hindsight, I know that was a massive awakening event. But at the time, I didn't know what awakening was. I just knew that something was way off, because I thought I'm supposed to be happy. I'm supposed to be ecstatic. I'm in my early 40s. I made it. I came here with $70 in a duffel bag when I was 23 years old. And, I made it. I've done it. And then, that void inside of me really, really ruptured. And that was my profound spiritual awakening experience. And then the universe kind of nudged me to go in a different direction.
Was there a specific situation that was the catalyst to you saying something is really wrong here with my life?
It's interesting you mentioned that, because there were several, but really I flew back. I remember, because all my businesses my headquarters were in Bogota. And it was like around January 14th, 15th. I just closed all the transactions and closed my office, said goodbye to my employees. And knowing that there was a very significant wire being made to my bank account. And I flew back, first class to Miami with a glass of champagne. And I was like, I'm supposed to be happy. I'm supposed to be like delirious. I mean, I made it. And why don't I feel anything? I feel empty. I feel a void. Now, mind you, this whole trajectory in business and the higher levels of business, I swam with the sharks, and I had become a shark. And I had really sold my soul to get where I got. And so now this realization started to settle in. But really, on that plane ride back, I was already like, man, why am I not happy? Why am I not like dancing in the streets? I mean, like, I made it. And that was really the starting point of this unraveling, where it just didn't make any sense anymore. And then, I had all this time on my hand because I'd sold most of my business. And I would find myself at these parties, and I lived here in an oceanfront community, and, all these people are really well-to-do. And I would find myself I felt like such a stranger. It's like, what are we occupying our time with? Like, what are we concerned about? And then I got into this. And then for a while, actually, I tried to get back into it, because then my ego kind of started negotiating with me and said, well, maybe you just need to make a little bit more money. Maybe this just wasn't enough, right? This is the impetus of my book, Never Enough Itis, because I always moved the goalposts.
Right.
And then I really couldn't do it anymore. So I would make the preparations and the decks, and I would call my investors and say, hey, I'm back in business. I'm going to do projects again. I would go set up these meetings, and my heart wasn't in it. I couldn't do it anymore. Something inside of me was like, it didn't care. It was like, it didn't make any sense anymore. I'm moving around decimals on a spreadsheet, and I'm making a lot of money for these people and kind of making a lot of money for myself. But what else is, there's got to be more to life than this.
So you've done this, and you're feeling lost, and you're trying to start up again, but you're not into it. Who was the first person, or what was the first spiritual class or whatever that triggered your attention, that got your attention?
Yeah, and I have to kind of go back a little bit in my life story, because I grew up in Holland, and my father was a very successful executive, so very much in the corporate world and all that. Now, my mother had a very successful business for herself, but she sold that in her early 40s as she went through spiritual awakening, and she became an astrologist and a graphologist. And during my teenage years, when my older brothers were already in the army and in the university, my mother would take me, mind you, in the 80s, to like holistic doctors that read your aura, and that were talking about chakras. And I was fascinated by all this stuff, but it didn't fit anywhere in my world, because everybody thought my mom was a half a loony. And, if I would talk to my friends, I was also a jock, I was in high school, I was like a popular guy. And if I would say, I went to this doctor and we're talking about chakras, people would look at me like, you've lost your mind. And so this spirituality got a little bit seeded in me by my mother, quite a bit actually, but then it got suppressed, because my father was, no, you go to university, you go do business, you go make money, you go be a man, and your worth is tied to how successful you are in the outside world. So this spirituality really, really got suppressed. And then in 2015, it surely, they kind of exploded. My heart opened up, right? And now I feel everything because I became clairsentient and claircognizant. And I didn't know what those things were. Now, it turns out my grandfather on my maternal side was clairvoyant, and my mother actually has quite a bit of these intuitive gifts as well. So, initially I went back to some of these books. I started reading the Stoic philosophers and Deepak Chopra and then Eckhart Tolle, and then I started ferocious rereading. And then I started going to retreats and workshops. And eventually in 2017, I got my yoga teacher certification. And I just went, the only speed I have in life is full bore, right? I am a total Aries alpha, and so even in spirituality, I was like, well, I just want to learn all of it. I want to figure this out. And really that was kind of what happened the next few years. And, over time, other experiences happened as well. The universe kept throwing me curveballs. I had a business I bought kind of on a whim. I got wiped out by a hurricane in 2017. And this is the only business deal I've ever done in my life with an unlimited personal guarantee. And then a week before that happened in September 2017, I went through a divorce when we decided to get divorced. And in that spring of that year, my father had passed away. And I had a big father wound, which was really the fuel behind all this kind of success that I had had. And so 2017 was really a big year because at the end of 2017, I had made the cataclysmic fall from grace. The money was either with my ex-wife or tied up with the bank. I couldn't do any new deals anymore because there was a negative pledge on this personal guarantee. So I was completely locked up. I lost most of my money. I had also bought a solar business in that period, which I already had on a contract, and that completely emptied my liquidity. And so I really was just stripped naked. And this is a moment where I decided to go into therapy. I was like, I just can't do this by myself. And so I went into intensive therapy actually for 3 months. Ironically, with the marriage counselor that I ran away from 2 years earlier, I said, this is nonsense. I'm not going to work on this. But that was the only counselor I knew to call, and she helped me for 3 months.
Wow. It's big when you deep dive into therapy. But now that you've been in therapy and then you go into spirituality, because I was in therapy before I stepped down my path. Right. And once I started going down my path, I healed so much faster on my spiritual path than I did with therapy. Now, there's a place for it, and I'm not saying to anybody that it doesn't have value. It does. But in my personal case, and it sounds like something about yours, Robert, is similar in the sense that really things just started shifting in the more positive once you started on that path.
Yeah, and I will say that even though she was a classically trained psychologist, she really was a spiritual teacher. And so, it was just, and I like her role was really to ground me in spirituality, because she kind of opened up and made me understand really in a much deeper level this awakening process. And that, it's not like one process, it's processes, you go through layers and spirals and, this unraveling of all these beliefs we have in our ego, and there's layers to it. And so she really gave me a roadmap on how to self-heal. And so it wasn't really classical, although there was some Jungian psychology in there that was very helpful for me because it's a beautiful framework. Jungian was actually a spiritual teacher disguised as a psychologist. And so we have had many actually teachers. I mean, I would say Einstein was really a spiritual prodigy disguised as a quantum physicist. And I write about this in my book, actually, because there's a lot of people that were very spiritually connected that we think of as physicists or a politician or, maybe a business person. But when you really kind of look what's behind it, you see this, a spiritual giant that was really embodied in that.
And Leonardo da Vinci is popping into my
Beautiful.
head.
Yeah, well, there's a quote on the back of my book. Art is never finished, only abandoned. That's Leonardo da Vinci. And so my book, and we'll get into it later. I mean, we are art. We are spiritual art.
We are.
And the only object is to not abandon yourself, which is why I love this quote from Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo. I mean, there are so many, spiritual prodigies that have been throughout history.
And if you go back, I mean, even going to Confucius back thousands of years,
Yeah,
saying things that are just so point on that can
yeah,
help you on your life's path.
100%.
So, okay, you use this phrase, we're both sculptor and sculpture.
Wow,
Let's
yeah.
talk about that.
Yeah. So again, and I'll refer to Michelangelo. And by the way, Michelangelo and the Hand of God is a very profound mural, right, in the 16th chapel, which has a very, very interesting spiritual background. Actually, everything that Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci and many of them did, it was all spiritual artwork. Much deeper meaning than we superficially recognize typically. But Michelangelo said, I saw David in the stone, and I just started removing all excess layers. And this is a little bit the process of spiritual purification, because we have all this mud around us, all this stuff that's stuck to us because of our upbringing and our enculturation and all these different things. And part of spirituality is really just stripping that away so David can emerge. And David is a non-gender here. I mean, for women, the same thing. It's a sculpture. And so we are the sculptor and the sculpture at the same time. When we talk about we are the spirit, what I call the spiritual poet, because you're here perfecting your spiritual art. That's the game we're playing here on Earth School. And we do it through things that we do in the world. So we do it through relationships. We do it through building businesses. We're doing it through being a painter, a friend, whatever it is. Those are just the things we do. But through that doing is we emanate our being. And it's the being really that counts. That's what we're here for.
I love it. This is the first time I've heard it presented in this way, and it really resonates with me. But I also paint, and I understand, what you're saying with those layers. And, I look at the layers as layers of various things, such as ego, that we don't want to get rid of ego. We just want to make our ego healthy. It's almost like
well, you can't get rid of your ego. If you get rid of your ego, you die.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
I mean,
can't get rid of ego.
it's your navigational aid, so you don't bump into furniture everywhere, and you know how to get around, and you know when you're hungry. So, I mean, the ego is a profoundly beautiful instrument. It just has to be mastered by the heart.
Yeah, and we have to learn how to curtail its helpfulness, because the ego actually thinks it's being helpful when it does the things that it does, where it leads you, and it isn't always down the best road, but it thinks it's doing the right thing.
Well, it has a limited purview, right?
Thank you. Yes.
And so the ego, the ego's entire perception of the world, the lens, the prism through which it sees the world, is only based on the actual experience it's had in its lifetime. And so that's very limited.
It's true.
Now, if you think about our mind is basically limited to that. Now, when you think about our heart, which is actually our center of feminine intelligence, right? Yes. Our heart is a portal to that higher intelligence, because this entire universe is intelligence. All of consciousness, formless consciousness, is one big, giant pool of awareness, intelligence, and energy. And so through our heart, we have access to that. Now, the language of the heart is feeling, sensing, intuiting, and direct knowing. And so we have to actually gain fluency in that language, learn to listen to the whispers, so we can now guide our ego on this journey from the place of the heart, rather than that very limited purview that our ego is just constrained by.
That's a great way of putting it. It's true. I want to go into why you call crisis, catastrophe, and calamities the crucibles in our life, which usually prove to be divine gifts wrapped in sandpaper.
100%. Yeah. So, even though it doesn't feel this way in life, and I've had plenty of crisis and catastrophe, and it obviously it's a very unpleasant feeling to go through these. But there, in this universe, in this game of life that we're playing, there is actually no bad experiences. They don't exist. There's no wrong experiences. They don't exist. They're all just experiences.
Yes.
And it tends to be that our crisis, catastrophe, and calamities are really where we are opened up to rise to a new level. Where when the gravy train is running, it's beautiful and it's fun and it's a beautiful experience. And that's part of life too, where everything is just going your way. But we don't learn that much during those periods. We don't evolve that much. Now, when we are faced with a crisis, catastrophe, or calamity, we are presented with an opportunity, a crucible, a choice. Now we can make a decision. We can see everything at a higher level, or we can see it at the same level and recreate it. Because in some way, we've been participatory in creating it. And when we start looking at it that way, it's a divine gift. It's just wrapped in sandpaper. It just feels like it's ucky. And this could be an illness. This could be a divorce, a heartbreak, a lost job. You lose all your money. And these are not pleasant things. Life is not always fun. These are really profound experiences that can really bring us to our knees.
Yes.
But from a spiritual perspective, it's sheer poetry. Because from that, the phoenix can rise. It's from those ashes that the phoenix rises to a new level of understanding, a new level of frequency and vibration. So you can now create a different reality for yourself, and you don't have to repeat it. And without that gift, without that crisis, without that catastrophe in your life, you wouldn't have been able to have that realization. And so this is why they're gifts.
It's true. I agree with you wholeheartedly, because our ability to change our ways happens when we're on our knees.
100%. Yeah, when we surrender.
Yeah, it's big to surrender.
And on a small and a big level, I quote everybody in my book because I think there's been so many profound teachers. But here's one from Albert Einstein, which is really profound. And it plays on a personal level, but also on a macro level. So Albert Einstein said, you cannot solve a problem at the level of thinking that created it.
Yeah.
Now, level of thinking, we can translate to intelligence. And when you think about awareness, being an aperture that opens up. So as we rise in consciousness, this aperture just opens up and we see an ever greater part of reality. So we have more information. We have more intelligence that become accessible to us. We can see the nuance in things. We can see the big picture in things. And so if we want to solve any problem in our life, we have to elevate our level of thinking, which is our level of intelligence. So how do we do that? We have to open up the awareness. The aperture of awareness needs to open up because the solutions to any problem is already in existence at a higher level of intelligence than which created the problem. And so if you look at this at the world today, and we see wars and violence and all these different things, hate and schisms and political problems and migration issues and all these things that will climate change, you can name all of it. All of it is a reflection of humanity needing to we're in a race to raise human consciousness, because all the solutions to all those problems are readily available at a higher level of intelligence. Now, if you allow me, let me explain intelligence the way the universe looks at it.
Okay.
So intelligence, the way the universe looks at it, is that which creates intelligent outcomes. Now, what are intelligent outcomes? Intelligent outcomes are those outcomes that are conducive to life itself. Now think about war, violence, death, destruction, degradation of our environment, destructing Mother Earth. Those are not intelligent outcomes.
No.
So the universe, in the definition of the universe and natural law, those are unintelligent outcomes, which can only come by definition from unintelligence. And so one of the problems we have in humanity is that we think IQ, that you can ace a derivative test or something, or you can put a complicated spreadsheet together that makes you intelligent. No, because if that derivative model is not conducive to life itself, it's unintelligence. And this is really where there's a big misunderstanding in humanity, because we see intelligence the wrong way. We really have it in the wrong light. Intelligence always creates intelligent outcomes. And what is intelligent outcome? It's conducive to life. Now, what is always creating intelligent outcomes? Love. Love always creates intelligent outcomes. Always.
I love that. I really love, I love that love creates that because, yeah, love is the ultimate. And if you can extend the love, and more importantly, if those you extend it to receive the love, major changes can
But
happen.
but think about it. Anything that is created, encircled, in marinated, or whatever you want to call in love, what does it do? It heals, grows, regenerates, unites, harmonizes, flowers, blossoms, and the list goes on. It creates beauty in life. And we all know this. We all know that which we love, even if it's, I'm going to go build a business. Well, if you build it with love, that business is going to flourish
Right.
because it's the magical pixie dust of this whole universe. If you infuse a friendship with love, that friendship is going to flourish. If you infuse your love partnership, your marriage, whatever it might be, if you infuse that with love from your side, that relationship is going to flourish. No matter what you do in life, this is the secret sauce. This is the magical pixie dust. And so when we look at the world today, are we loving towards the rest of the world, towards Mother Earth? Where are all these wars coming from? Where is all this violence coming from? That has nothing to do with love. Of
No.
course, it's fear expressing itself. It's lower levels of, they just don't quite have access yet to this kind of vibration. But it's all about raising our consciousness,
Yes.
human consciousness. Because at higher levels of human consciousness, all of this becomes available. Actually, it becomes obvious. It becomes self-evident.
I like that. So let's talk about you've referred to your book. It's called Love+Truth. Let's deep dive into what is the book about and why that book opposed to, because it's very different, or it's different from your first book.
It is, yeah.
So let's go into what
All
it
right.
is, what's it about, and what was the
Yeah,
impetus
so
behind it.
let me tell you the origins of the two books because that really explains it. So Never Enough Ida started when I was in therapy because my therapist said, you have so much unexpressed emotion. I want you to start writing and journaling. And then I was journaling a little bit and I said, well, I don't know about this journaling, but if I write a book, it's a project, I'm more likely to do it. She said, I just want you to write. I don't care what you do. And so Never Enough Idas was really born from this self-therapy writing. And it was really the story, the arc of my life and, up the mountain, down the mountain, and how I got out of the rabbit hole that I found myself in. And then this book was a download that I had, really a massive download last April. And the whole book, the entire outline, 5 parts, 38 chapters, and it's anchored in sacred geometry. So this is a spiritual teaching framework. And the first part is a really broad foundational pieces of, what is this reality actually? What is this earth school about? And what does this look like? And what I really try to do throughout my book is to connect all the ancient wisdom traditions, all the Stoic philosophers, but I compare it to the quantum physicists like Einstein and Niels Bohr and David Bohm that are saying the same thing in scientific terms. And so I can contrast Confucius and Lao Tzu that lived 5,000 years ago and what they were talking about, and they spoke in the language of their time.
Right.
Now, when you translate that, you go look at what an Einstein talks about. He spoke in the language of his science, but it's the same thing, right? And this is throughout history. We've had so many teachers and the beautiful indigenous cultures about the great spirit and the universe being one. All of this it's all connected. They're all talking about the same thing. And so in the first part, I kind of create a lay of the land, so to speak, so we can work from there. In the second part, I really go deep into the master polarity in our universe, which is masculine and feminine. And I really explain that on a very deep level and what that really represents. And then when you project this masculine and feminine, you get the tetrahedron, which is the Star of David. And that creates certain areas. And so this comes into 6 gifts. And each of the masculine and feminine have 3 aspects that I go really deep into. And that creates another 6 gifts. And then the other 6, when you enclose that sacred geometry, is you get the principles of this universe. And you get such things like oneness and harmony and growth, which are all natural principles in our universe. It's what our universe is based on. Now, in the 5th part, I try to take that whole body of work and I say, okay, how do I make this now and become a spiritual poet? How do I take this? Because I'm a real life guy. I'm a Columbia Business School guy. I still work in companies. We can be really woolly and think that, we're all supposed to go to Tibet and sing Om for 6 hours a day on the mountain. But that is actually not my form of spirituality. I'm not saying it's not a beautiful experience, but I believe here in our school, we're here to be in life. We're here to create with life. We're here to have relationships and build lives and have beautiful friendships and build businesses and have jobs and eat healthy food and have beautiful experiences. And so we live through all of that, but we can choose to be a spiritual poet in all those things that we do. So now our life becomes a canvas that we paint every day.
I talk about a lot about how every day is a blank canvas, and it's up to you to decide how you want to create your day based on this canvas.
100%.
So very, very together with that. I want to go back to the rabbit hole. So how do you guide people out of the rabbit hole to help themselves to get out of the rabbit hole? Is that in the book? Is anything like that in the book?
I mean, to some extent, because it's got a full. I wish I had this book 10 years ago, because it took me 10 years of reading about 1,000 books and going to dozens of workshops, retreats, and following, mentorship from various teachers and gurus and things like that. And I synthesized this in this book, even though I channeled it. It's embodied work. And so, I wish I had this 10 years ago, because it would have probably saved me a few years and a lot of anguish, but everything was exactly as it needed to be. So I needed to go on this path, and I needed to go on this discovery and discover all this. So the book definitely gives you a ethos of how to be spiritual artist. Very practical in the 5th part. Like, how do I actually do this? And why would I do this? Like, why does this even matter? Now, if I'm talking about someone that comes to me and they're, maybe fallen on hard times, or in some way they're, usually it's they're in the beginning stages of awakening, or there's just a cataclysmic event in their life. Like, how do you deal with something like this? We don't come out of the womb knowing how to deal with a divorce. We don't come out of the womb with something, catastrophic, losing a loved one or a kid or losing our job. We're not really trained for these things. And so how do we deal with these things? Well, in spirituality, the way I teach it, there's beautiful tools. But the first thing we have to do, right, is to understand and to really step into this notion that I don't have any power unless I'm willing to accept full responsibility and full accountability for everything that's in my life.
Yes.
Because once I do that, I reclaim the power that I can change it. But as long as I'm saying, well, they did this to me and I was born in the wrong neighborhood and I have the wrong color, wrong gender, wrong, whatever it is. And I'm not saying that there's no unfairness in this world. I'm just saying, as long as you are projecting that the outside world dictates what your life looks like, you have no power. You have abdicated your power to create something different. So one of the first steps we get into is, okay, we need to reclaim the power, which means that everything in my life as it stands today, in some way, I was participatory in. Mm-hmm. I somehow created it. I might not know how I created it. And then to some extent, I might be innocent because I just did it because I didn't know any better.
Right.
But I have to accept responsibility and accountability. Now, from that point, we can start unraveling, which is what I do in my book. I said, well, what if it's all for good reason? What if there's actually poetry in that which we think is terrible? What if we can now see that maybe within this heartbreak, as excruciating as it is, trust me, I've had my heart broken. I've cried in the fetus position in my bed. I know what it feels like. I'm not saying it's fun. But what if it's for our higher good? What if everything that happens in our life is for our greatest growth, greatest prosperity, and greatest evolution? Now, we might not be able to see it right in the middle of the storm, but I promise you, once you get out of the storm, at some point, you're going to see that was true, because everything is always in perfect order. Now, from that place, we can start looking, well, how did I create this? What did I do? How am I participatory in this? Whatever that is, right? And if it's just the loss of a loved one, is, well, how can we reconcile that life and death are part of life? How can we accept that there's nothing permanent at all anywhere in our life? And we have all these false securities in homes and jobs and money in the bank and all these things, that they're all false securities. The only real security there is deep inside of you, is you. Everything
Yeah.
else is impermanent. There's not a single person in this world that we're going to meet and not at some point say goodbye to, even if it's our own goodbye out of life. Everything you're attached to, you're going to have to give up at the end.
Yep. Yeah. 100%. You can't take it with you. The only thing you can take with you is what you create in your heart.
And so, yeah. And so a lot of the suffering that we have is that we're holding on to things because we think they should be different. So we think that
That's
breakup
true.
should not have happened. I shouldn't have lost this job. I shouldn't have gotten ill. I shouldn't have had, why did I get this cancer? Well, of course, it's terrible to have cancer, but there's poetry in that too. Because your body is designed to be healthy. There's nothing that you are epigenetically predisposed that you must have. There is a healthy version of you and there's an unhealthy version of you. And so this unhealthy version has been energetically enabled by some choices and some things in your life, including the beliefs you have.
Yes.
Right. And so now we can look at, even if it's terminal, there's beautiful stories of people that really are able to reconcile their entire life towards the graceful last few months or years of their life. And we view this as they prematurely left us, and it's so unfair. But maybe the richness of those final years or months was more than they would have ever had staying alive another 40 years. So who's to say that that wasn't a poetic, beautiful experience for them as a soul? Not as us staying behind and losing our loved one.
Right.
But for them as a soul, who are we to say that that wasn't like an incredible evolutionary experience for them as a soul? To have that realization.
Yeah. Gift of growth is what
Yeah.
I'm hearing. So, because a lot of people don't. And if you can get past the anger, because many people get angry when they're diagnosed with an illness that could potentially take them early or earlier. But we do all have our expiration dates, don't we?
Nobody dies before it's their time.
Exactly.
And death is part of life, and death comes in many different forms. Death comes in that when we leave high school, that's the death of high school. Now we go into college or something, right? When we go into college, there's a death, there's a birth of college, there's a death to college. There's some friendships that have a place in our life and then they die.
Right.
There's jobs that we love, and then at some point we move on. So there's life and death in everything. Everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And Heraclitus said, beautiful Stoic philosopher, nothing ever is. Everything is always becoming. Because everything in the outside world is always ever changing. Nothing ever stays the same. When you have a beautiful moment right now with your husband or your spouse or your lover, that moment will never come back in that exact way. Maybe more other moments will come, but that will never be the same. But that doesn't mean that that's bad. You could just savor what it was.
That's true. I mean, everything you're saying is so aligned with my belief and my education. I could just sit here and listen to you go on and on. But I do have another question. Explain finite games, the games that men play, versus the one infinite game, the one that spirit plays. Explain that to our audience, please.
Yeah, so this is in part one. This is where I kind of lay out like this architecture of the grand architecture of this reality called Earth School. And so finite games is the game man plays. Now, what are finite games about? Finite games are about chasing trophies. right? In some way, we're going for fame, fortune, applause, recognition, status. We want to be seen, we want to be important, and all those things. And there's nothing inherently bad with it, but we can get totally lost in it. And we are certainly lost when we think that finite games is what life is about, which is where most people are. They think that that is what you're supposed to do. You just go out in the world and you go do all these things and chase all these things, and then then your worth is measured by that.
Right.
And you get really interesting, and there's more details to it, but you get really interesting things that, there's boundaries in finite games and how we measure it. And to give you an example, so if you look at the Fortune 500 richest people in the world, that's a finite game, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're number 501 and you still have billions and billions of dollars, you don't count in that game. You are a loser in that game. And this is where we get caught up with failures. We think because we don't have something or we don't measure up, we are a failure now, right? This is inherent in finite games.
Yes.
Now, the one infinite game, that's the game Spirit plays. Now, the game Spirit, God, Creator, Source, Infinite Intelligence, I don't care what you call it, right? I'm very agnostic in the labels that we use. Those are linguistic labels, whatever you feel comfortable with. Now, what is that game all about? Well, first of all, that is an eternal game. That's not played over the 80 years you're here on Earth. You're playing that for eternity. You got nowhere to go, but just enjoy yourself and get a little better every day. There's nothing to win. You're just in a co-evolutionary game. You're just here to evolve. There's no trophies to win. There's no, nobody is ahead, nobody's behind. You're just on your own your journey, right? To just forever refine and perfect yourself, with the allowance of being totally flawed, because none of us are here on Earth School unless we were flawed and imperfect. So guess what? You don't have to be perfect, and you can be flawed. All of that's being asked in this game is that you work on your spiritual art in the best to your ability. That's all that's being asked of you. And it's an eternal game. We got all the time in the world.
Exactly. And many lifetimes to do it in.
You don't have to be a spiritual guru tomorrow. You don't have to be an exalted being and be an archangel. And you don't have to do any of those things. Just work on your art. Work on refining yourself, right? And obviously there's a connection with a higher source, because you're really talking about your higher self. Now, this game is really the game that's being played at all times, across all timelines, all geographies, everywhere in the universe. This is the game the universe is playing. And so once we realize that actually that's the real game we're in, now finite games become play, and much less, you can play whatever finite game you want. You want to be see what it's like to be a corporate titan? Go play that game. Just don't forget you're in the infinite game. Bring that game, because all finite games play out within the infinite game, but there's no infinite game within the finite game. And once we understand that difference, the real game you're in is the infinite game, is you perfecting your spiritual art. Now, whichever finite game you play, that could be a teacher or having a beautiful podcast, or you decide to write books, or you want to be a homemaker, it doesn't matter. You can play the finite game whichever way you want.
That's true. It's very, very true. I need to take a break here 1 second. We have charity shout out time. So the charity shout out time is the time when I present the charity of choice of my guest, and Robert's charity is Coral Restoration Foundation. Let's talk about it and why that one is the one that you submitted.
Yeah, it's very dear to me. First of all, I'm a diver. At one point I was a board member of the Coral Restoration Foundation. They do beautiful work. They plant corals all around the Florida Keys, but actually they have worldwide programs that they sponsor and do a lot of research around as well. And so their core mission is to restore the coral, which is really the breeding grounds for all organic life and fish life in the oceans. And so corals are really fundamental to the ecosystem. And they're particularly impacted by the rising temperatures of the ocean. So this last year, summer, actually was really devastating. But they do a beautiful job. They do beautiful work. I'm a big fan of what they do. I still occasionally go on these coral planting dives in the Keys, and it's all it's a beautiful organization. I really love what they do, so that's why I picked them.
How can people help?
Me or the Coral Restoration Foundation?
Coral,
Donations.
Coral
Well, there's two things actually.
Restoration.
They have one of. If you're a diver, you should go on their website. Once a year, they organize something called Coral Palooza, and it's the largest single-day coral planting event in the world. And you can sign up and be a diver if you're scuba certified, and you can actually volunteer and be, planting corals and be participatory in it. Other than that, they're like any foundation. The more money, access to resources, financial resources they have, the more broadly they can plant coral everywhere, because it's obviously costs money. They breed the coral in certain ways in their nurseries, which are actually in the ocean. And then they take the coral once it's kind of matured to a certain level, and then they plant it on the coral, and then they go back and do certain kind of maintenance programs and research programs. So like any foundation that does this kind of work, they're always looking for additional resources and funding.
So it could be either being a diver or financially funding.
Just make a small donation, even $5 or $10. You can subscribe to their. They're great on social media too. It's really fun to watch what they're doing. It's really it's encouraging to see. And they have newsletters, and they give updates on how many corals they planted and all that stuff. It's actually really interesting. And they share research that they've done.
Well, it's really interesting because just recently I saw somebody who had a coral farm. There was some news, something that came across my television, and I found it fascinating how they are trying to regrow these corals and to bring more health into the environment, the ocean environment.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
We don't lose our ability to have seafood or seaweed.
Yeah, it's a foundation piece. It's a keystone species. Actually, coral is not a rock. Coral is actually an organism, and so it's a keystone species. When we lose the coral, we will lose all fish life in the ocean, because it's the breeding ground of all the small organisms and the little larger fish and the little larger fish, and eventually in the apex of the food chain in the ocean, that leads to the largest fish. The tuna you eat and all that. So if you lose the coral, eventually you will lose all fish life.
How does coral die? I know that we're going a side subject, but
it's kind of, in a very rudimentary way, coral is actually very resilient. It's been here for hundreds of thousands of years. And so it can deal with temperature changes and environmental changes over the course of thousands or tens of thousands of years, because it evolves with the changes in weather or patterns or ocean temperature. Now, what we've seen in the last 50 to 100 years is a very rapid increase in the ocean temperatures. And so coral cannot respond to that organically in its cycle of evolution, because all life of nature evolves over hundreds or thousands of years, not 10 years, and so it's really struggling with this rapid rise in ocean temperature. And the second part is the acidification that's taking place. So as ocean temperatures rise and we put more and more pollutants, the Mississippi Delta has a death zone the size of half of Texas, because all the fertilizer and all the glyphosate and all the artificial stuff, all the fertilizer stuff that goes on the heartland, the farmland, it runs off through the Mississippi Delta, and it's dumped basically into the Mexican Gulf Basin. And so that causes acidification of the ocean, and all natural organisms, really struggle with that.
Thank you. Thank you to explain to me, to the audience, and how that works, so that people might not realize how important it is, and now we'll step up and help. So thank you.
And the other way to help is buy organic food, right? Just for your own health, but also because it doesn't have glyphosate, herbicides, pesticides. Really eat clean. If you eat meat or fish, wild caught, or you mainly raise regenerative meat, if you choose to eat meat, all these things have a massive impact. Minimize, consumption that is not absolutely necessary. Because, all your waste product that you create is pollution. It ends up in the ocean. We have a plastic pollution epidemic in all the oceans, which actually the turtles mistake it for food because they eat, what do you call that? I forget the name now. But anyway, the turtles mistake it, and then they digest plastic. And then, they can die because their system can't digest it.
Right. Very, very sad. Robert, we've got 5 minutes left. I've asked you a lot of things, but there are a lot of things I haven't gotten to. What would you like to share with the listening audience that's top on your mind to get out there?
Well, I think to take anything from my book is really, you are your own teacher, right? And really, what I subscribe to is I hope to empower people with my book. I want you to take my book and see yourself as your own teacher, because it's all about remembrance. Every single one of us is hardwired to be clairsentient and clairvoyant and all these things. We'll all have that divine nature to us, and we all have that potential. And so really, if I can, inspire anybody, just see that in yourself. You are an empowered creator, and you can heal yourself, whatever it is, whatever is going on in your life, whatever circumstances. You are so much bigger than the circumstances, right? But you might have to find some areas where you have to gain some mastery, some insight into yourself. Know thyself. I talk about that a lot. Like, really look into yourself and maybe go into these dark places within you where there are wounds and scars and bruises. But those wounds and scars and bruises are probably reflecting themselves in the thoughts you have, the disempowering thoughts, in the illnesses that might show up, or the relationships that show up that aren't fulfilling and aren't, where you don't feel seen and heard. And all of that is going to be an inward journey. But you have the power to change all of it.
You do. It's all inside. Sometimes you need some outside guidance.
Of course.
Sometimes we
I've
get
had many people
lost.
help me. I continue to have many people help me, because we have blind spots. So no matter how far along you are, you're still going to have blind spots. You're still going to have things that other people can maybe shine a light on and help you with. It's not wrong to have teachers.
Like they say, it takes a village.
Yeah, for sure.
And if the village is supporting one another, then you're like right there in the right place. Yeah. If they're not supportive, my personal suggestion would be find another village.
Yeah, for sure.
But people find that hard to do. People find it hard to let go of, let's say, a village that doesn't serve them, so that they could find the village that does serve them.
Well, in life, you don't know what you don't know. And so sometimes for your ego, especially, the known, even though it might hold you in suffering, is more comfortable than actually go outside and step into that which you today couldn't know because you've never really stepped into it. So there are some steps along our path. All of us are going to have to dig into a little bit of spiritual courage and fortitude to make that step, to make a different choice in our life, and to step in the unknown.
It's true. There's I don't know if you'd call it a passage but there's something that you gave me that's straight from my book, from your book, not my book. And I'd love for you to recite that. Love is the secret sauce.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to do that.
Because it's really beautiful.
All right. So this is in the introduction, actually, and I'll read it real quick. You don't really need to read this book. There's nothing in this book that you don't already know deep within you. The best this book can do is activate your remembrance. So to save you the trouble of reading, let me summarize this book for you. Love is the secret sauce. Love is the only answer. This is the only truth. And honestly, we each know this, although we might not live it. Anything created, empowered, infused, bestowed, encircled, or embraced with love inevitably heals, thrives, grows, flowers, blossoms, unites, harmonizes, regenerates, and creates effervescent beauty in whatever form that might appear. Love is the sacred elixir of life itself, the magical, energetic pixie dust of this universe, that which animates all of creation. Love is infinitely intelligent, wise, and powerful. And when we awaken to this remembrance, the nucleus of divinity deep within us is sparked and reignited.
That is really beautiful, Robert. Thank you. And thank you so much for sharing your experiences about your book on the show. I am so grateful to have you here. So thank you very
Well,
much.
thank you. Thank you so much for having me on the show. Great conversation. I really enjoyed it. And thank you so much. I really do appreciate it.
My pleasure. And I want to thank Bridget, my right hand, my left hand. Thank you so much for all you do for me. I don't know how I'd get through, especially the technical stuff, if it wasn't for you. So thank you so much. I want to thank you, the listening audience, for taking time out of your lives, out of your day to be a part of this show. Whether you're listening to it live or you're going to listen to it on a rebroadcast, I'm just so grateful that you're here because this show was created for you from my heart to yours. So thank you. Next week, my guest is Stephanie Wade. Stephanie is a Reiki master. She's certified by Delphi University as a master transpersonal spiritual counselor and energy healer, and is an ordained non-denominational minister in the Church of Wisdom, as am I. So I can't wait to have Stephanie on the show. I hope you'll tune in for that. Also, check out my book, which is called My Fucking Long Journey to Loving Myself, A Guide to a Shorter Path. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on my website. And I think it's a great gift for the holidays. So keep that in mind. So as I leave you, as always, I'm sending you love, blessings, and gratitude. Know how grateful I am that you're in my life in whatever capacity you're in it. For not only are you my student, you are my teacher. Not only am I a teacher, I am your student. So thank you. And I'm going to say these 3 words that I always say. I can't leave the show without it. I'm saying it now. I love you. You are loved, not just by me, not just by your family and friends, colleagues, community, but you have a plethora of beings on the other side of the veil who are just waiting for you to talk to them, to ask for what it is you need, want, desire in your life. Remember, when you talk to them, give them as much detail as possible so they can go out and start manifesting this for you. Now, I'm going to give 2 caveats very quickly. Number 1, know that these messages may come in a very esoteric form. It might not be as easy as like talking to a friend on the phone, but you can get it through a passage in a book, overhearing a conversation, a song lyric. It goes on and on. Those spiritual guides can be tricksters and they like to have fun. So be open to how it comes to you. And know that if it doesn't come in the time frame you want it, look within yourself and see if you need to tweak something, which will then allow them to go and bring back to you what it is you need in your lifetime. I'm Dr. Marla Goldberg. Thank you for being here, and I will see you next week. Stay well. Bye for now.
Thank you.